I feel a tiny bit of a fraud because our object here is just one object out of many. Upstairs there is one of Johnny Ive's beautiful Apple MacBook Airs in pieces, and somebody just tweeted saying Apple Care isn't going to cover that because it's in little pieces. I imagine the story is familiar to most of you, that this dates back to the summer of 2013 when we started publishing the revelations from Edward Snowden. It was the largest leak of its kind in history. And in the past 2 years, that's led to a very intense debate around the world about the issues that I think Snowden wanted to highlight. It's led to many lawsuits. It will lead to changes in the law. But the reaction has been complex. And if this exhibition was happening in Germany, it would be a different exhibition, and the response would be different from the UK and from the US. And I think that's what's so interesting about putting it into a museum, because I think it provokes and allows that kind of debate to happen about it. Edward Snowden, in distributing the material originally, did aim for a geographical spread. It was in, I think, 5 different continents, 5 different countries in 4 different continents. And it wasn't a surprise, it wasn't long before we got visited at The Guardian by the British government, and that contact arrived in the form of the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Jeremy Hayward. It was a pleasant enough conversation. He wanted us to stop. I said we weren't yet ready to stop, and that if he did try and stop us, publication would continue in Rio de Janeiro and Berlin and Washington, and so it was a difficult story for him to stop. Nevertheless, he was back within a couple of weeks. His mood had changed. It was a slightly less pleasant conversation, and he said it had to stop. Number 10 put it this way: we'd had our fun. Sir Jeremy said, you'd had enough debate. I said, the debate is continuing. He said, you'd had enough debate. And I said, I didn't think it was for the Cabinet Secretary to determine how much debate a country should have about something. If you had a free press and the free press was to mean anything, that wasn't for governments to determine. Nevertheless, it was clear that they were serious, and that if we didn't return the material or destroy it, that they would move to some form of law. We had 2 options. One was that we could refuse to comply. That seemed to me likely to lead to a shutdown of our reporting, probably worldwide, while others carried on with their reporting. That didn't seem like a very good option. And the second was to continue with our reporting out of New York and go along with the destruction of the machines. I told the government that I thought this was a completely futile act because the reporting would carry on. Whatever happened, this was not a story that was going to be suppressible. But nevertheless, they were determined, so we came to an agreement. And so even though there were copies elsewhere in the world which would carry on being the source, the government came to the Guardian's offices one Saturday morning and supervised the work by Paul Johnson there and David Bishon there and Sheila Fitzsimons there, who had gone out and rented a lot of Black & Deckers the day before and instructed them on how to destroy a computer, which is harder than you may think. There are specific bits that you have to drill out. You have to attack it with angle grinders, and it was a very hot and dusty work, I'm told. I'd gone off to play the piano in France by that time. And you end up with those fragments that you'll see upstairs. I just want to talk a tiny bit about what this object means, because in my mind it's changed over time. So at first, we had a meeting, we had a visitation from the mayor of Leipzig. And the mayor of Leipzig looked at the smashed up remains, and to him this was a tremendously sinister thing. He thought this was like book burning. And of course it's obvious why a mayor of Leipzig would react like that. If you go to Leipzig, there is a Stasi museum. It's a permanent exhibition called Power and Banality. And in that museum, you will find the work of the agents who were working in the post office, opening and reading mail. They routinely broke into homes and planted bugs. They used the technology of the time, which was tiny cameras and bugging equipment. They have jars in this museum of the body sense of potential suspects so that they could be tracked by dogs. And anyone who was not a good citizen of the GDR was persecuted or worse. So it's no wonder that the mayor of Leipzig should react to the sight of the state destroying material held by a newspaper and feeling that that had a very uncomfortable resonance. And for a long time I felt that too. But then my mind's changed over time. And I feel this object has a different kind of meaning for me, because actually we went on reporting. It was impossible to suppress this information. And so to me, it's more now an icon of the impotence of the state in the digital age. The British government in the end couldn't prevent publication. And the very thing, this digital space that they want to master and control for understandable reasons, is impossible to master and control for the very same reasons. It's the very same technology that makes it impossible to master and control, because information is now like water. And the agencies couldn't contain it, they couldn't keep it safe themselves. It leaked, as WikiLeaks had leaked before, and once it was out, they couldn't rebottle it. Now, of course, the agencies here are not the Stasi. But anyone who's read Orwell writing in 1948 about 1984, which is in the lifetimes of most people in this room, understand the potential for evil and malign uses of that nature of intrusion and of the dangers of complacency. So to me, this is if you go upstairs and see this object, it's a hopeful icon about how in the 21st century governments and rulers are going to find it actually very hard to repress and suppress information. And if you don't live in the UK, if you're not lucky enough to live in the UK and be a citizen here, but to live in a country where information is routinely suppressed, which is probably the majority of governments in the world, I think this is a message of hope. So I'm really glad that we were contacted by the VNA and Corinna, who asked for these fragments, because I think it allows a continuation of what was, everyone now agrees, even the agencies, even the politicians, agree that this was a necessary debate, whether they like Snowden or hate him. It was a debate that had to be had. It had to be a public debate, because it's about the use of our data. So if we're talking about stuff that belongs to us, this is our data. The data belongs to us, and we may or we may not be happy for other people, including the state, to collect, store, and search that data. As I say, we may be happy or we may not, but that has to follow on from a debate. And it has to be a debate that is informed, and that's what we tried to do with The Guardian. It's a public debate. That information belongs to you, and so this symbol of how a state couldn't prevent that debate by smashing up these machines seems to me an incredibly important symbol. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having this in your museum, and I look forward to that debate continuing.